Hello, good morning to everyone. I'd like to start by thanking everyone for allowing me to be here. Thank you to Creative Mornings for giving me the space to reflect on what Ripple means to me and to impart whatever little wisdom I have on you. Thank you to everyone who has taken some time out of their morning to meet me, to listen to me. I very much appreciate that. And thank you to my partner, Jack, who worked as my chauffeur this morning and will be running slides for me. I also want to acknowledge this is my first time leaving my home in the last year for something other than groceries. So I've got my notes in my hand. I'm hoping that I don't need them, but I'm feeling a little out of my element. So bear with me while I tell you my story today. I think perhaps the best way to introduce myself to you is to first introduce you to the two people who made me, my parents, Mike and Sherry. My mom was born in South City, St. Louis, and my dad was born over the river in Cahokia, Illinois. They met when they were 18 and 21. My mom went to a party that her cousin took her to, and she saw my dad across the room. You can see in this picture just hair flowing. His mustache was penciled in by a grease pencil because he could never grow one fully himself. But she saw him across the room and she thought, I must know that man. She went and introduced herself. Sparks flew, and my dad invited her out on his speedboat the next day. Long story short, 5 months later, they were engaged, and 8 months after that, they were married. Neither of them were too, inclined to continue school after high school. They were both much more excited to start their lives and to start a family together. So that's what they did. They bought a little house in South City, a couple blocks away from my grandparents, and almost exactly 9 months after they were married, my brother was born, and a couple years after that, I followed. Growing up in the city was awesome. My brother and I could walk to school together. It was a couple blocks away. We were surrounded by our peers from school and other kids our age. I learned how to ride a bike in an alley. We played hide and go seek on sidewalks. One of my favorite memories was the day they shut the street down to repave it in front of our house, and we zoomed up and down on roller skates and bikes all day until dinner time. We also used to just gather all of our change. We couldn't count it yet, but we'd head to the bakery down the street, throw it on the counter, and ask how many cookies we could buy. We stayed in this house as long as we could, a little 2-bedroom house in the city, but at some point we started to outgrow it, and my parents knew it was time for a change. My dad, it was a welder, he was a fabricator, he's now retired, so he was used to building and fixing things with his own father, and he wanted space to build and fix things for himself. So my parents started looking around and figuring out what their options were. They looked at places at, pre-existing homes, and they couldn't find anything that was a good fit. So they decided to move in the best way they knew how. They wanted a new place. They found some land they liked, and they would build the house themselves, literally themselves. And we also couldn't afford to keep, our house in the city while building a new house. So we were going to have to make the transition pretty quick. My parents found land that they liked in a small farm town called Waterloo, Illinois, just across the river from St. Louis. We were a big camping family at the time, and we tended to drive through Waterloo on our way to the place where we commonly went camping. And they saw it over the years, thought it was cute, thought it had a good school system, thought it would be a great place for my brother and I to spread our wings and have some different opportunities. My dad designed the house. I remember we had a desk in our living room at the time, and my dad spent evenings bent over a giant graph paper pad where he drew out the blueprints of the house. I actually have that graph paper now, and I used it about 30 years later to chart out the argument for my dissertation. My parents, I should mention, are pros at patience and sacrifice. Whenever I describe my parents to people, I normally use the words efficient and effective. And so they decided that the way we could make this happen is that we would stay in a camper on the land so that we could wake up early and get right to work. And you can see our little camper here. I'll note that these pictures are poor quality because they were taken about 30 years ago. My parents also very kindly scanned them in for me. So all these pictures are courtesy of them today. But you can see, here's our camper. It's actually, I think, my grandparents and one of my uncles sitting in a fire because it was very windy, very cold out there sometimes. So they're kind of huddled around this fire to stay warm. But so we stayed in this camper. My parents would wake up early and get to work. And it was kind of awesome because as kids, our whole family would come and help build. My grandparents, both sets of my grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, we would all kind of run around. And as kids who had grown up largely in the city, we really became wild animals. There were woods nearby, there was a creek, a bunch of things that we weren't accustomed to in the city. We could run around half naked. At one point, I realized that there were arrowheads in the field, and I would just march straight lines back and forth to see how many I could collect in a day. Half the time we were barefoot. It was really like a totally new adventure for us. There was scraps of wood, scraps of various building materials around that my dad gave us access to. My brother and I would try to build stools, try to build benches, and my dad would always kindly explain to us why they wobbled or what components they were missing. My grandpa, one weekend, built us these giant box kites. In my memory, they were about the size of me as a 7-year-old. And I remember they were so big and so substantial that when they caught wind, if I held on tight, it would drag me across the yard. Once a random dog showed up and my brother and I taught it how to walk on a balance beam that we created until we went to bed and the dog disappeared for the night. At night, we would often rinse ourselves off with icy hose water. My dad would take a bath in a big trough that he also used to mix concrete. And that was sort of our life. I am about the same age now as my dad was when they took this project on, and I often think how absolutely miserable this must have been for him. You know, as kids, we felt like we hit the jackpot. We had this new exposure to nature. You can see some of the kind of guts of the house here on the slides, and we climbed all over it. We could play hide and go seek in the roof beams. But for my dad, he would often come home in the evenings after a hard day at, a very manual job and get right to work building wall frames or climb on the roof to hang a few shingles before bedtime. For my parents, this was actually a lot of work. Today, I will probably get overwhelmed and exhausted from sitting on too many Zoom calls in comparison. So our plan was ultimately that we would live in the basement while my parents built up this house. So we stayed in the camper, we kind of traveled back and forth a little bit, and once the basement was ready, we moved in. The basement was pretty much a 1-bedroom apartment with a little kitchenette. My brother and I got the bedroom. My parents used their bedroom sort of doubled as the living room. And we stayed down there for 2 years. No natural light whatsoever. Now, my dad got to go to work every day. My brother and I went to school. My mom was a stay-at-home mom during this time, so she was really in a basement with no light for years. My parents tell me now that 2 years in, she kind of lost it and said, we've got to find a way to fix this. We have to figure out a way to make the house be finished so we can move upstairs. And somehow they did. From here, I don't really remember much about the transition. I remember living in the basement, and I remember living in my room upstairs. I remember going upstairs and brand new plush green carpeting. I remember wallpaper in the kitchen. I remember shelves that my dad put up in my room so that I could, display whatever random bits of treasure I had as a kid. But I don't remember a day where we carried all of our stuff upstairs. I just remember at one point we eventually lived there. It's important that I describe my parents to you because my parents taught me how to dream and how to build. They taught me how to envision a future that I wanted and how to make it happen. They taught me about sacrifice, and they taught me what community looks like whenever they brought our family around to help build the thing that we were looking for. They taught me how to visualize a world that was better and how to put my head down and make it happen. I think that this month resonates for me in a particular way because of this. I guarantee that if you asked my parents why they did this transition the way that they did it, they would say, well, we wanted a house and we didn't have enough money to have two places or to have someone build it. And we knew we had to do it in this slow way. But what they don't realize is that they really taught us how to build something for ourselves in the process and how to have patience when we do it. I think often when we think about change, we picture more of a tidal wave. We want to make a sudden movement. We want to inject a problem with capital, but that's often not how we get change at the cellular level. It's tiny ripples, it's tiny changes, 1,000 tiny actions that slowly get us there along the way. And if we're talking about social movements or we're talking about building houses, mistakes are often made. My mom will be the first to tell you that the beams, the exposed beams that run the length of their living room were not put there for any sort of design reason, but because the ceiling kept cracking at the seams and they needed a way to cover it up. But they made mistakes, they fixed them, and they moved on. I fell in love with community work in a lot of kind of choppy, haphazard ways. As a kid, when I lived in the city, I mentioned my mom was a stay-at-home parent, and she would often take me to volunteer, often around causes having to do with food insecurity. So I was used to seeing people different from me. I was used to giving some of my time away to others. I was also a Girl Scout, and I loved earning badges and learning about different cultures and different kinds of people. I've also always been a voracious reader, which I think naturally draws you to different kinds of stories. When I was in my last semester of college, I discovered the gender studies section of the library, and I was forever changed. I studied business in college, and a few years into my post-college job that was very businessy, I was ready for a change. The job had taught me a lot. It was it moved me to Chicago. It was a really great starting point, but I just didn't feel any sort of emotional connection to it. So I started doing some research and figuring out where I wanted to go next and what I wanted to do. And the best way that I knew to learn more about a space and to learn more about what was going on was to volunteer. So I looked up any organization I could find that had anything to do with anything I cared about, so largely kids, music, and sports, and volunteered in whatever ways I could. I helped to run silent auctions. I handed out snacks at events. I did whatever administrative work anyone needed. And along the way, I met other people who were volunteering alongside me, and I met other organizations and learned what they were all doing to try to create change in this new city that I called home and that I loved. When I was 24, I watched a documentary about a girls' music camp and totally fell in love. It showcased what it looked like to give a 10-year-old a microphone and tell her to shout into it. And I was totally blown away. So I Googled this documentary to learn more and found that there was a sort of sister camp in Chicago called Girls Rock Chicago. You can see the slide and a little bit of information about Girls Rock Chicago. Girls Rock Chicago is part of the Girls Rock Global Alliance, so it makes it sort of like a franchise of summer camps, if you will. And so a little bit about this camp, if you don't know anything about it, they take girls, trans, gender nonconforming, non-binary kids, ages 8 to 16, and over the course of a week, they teach them how to play an instrument, form a band, write a song, and have a big concert at the end. When I was a counselor, the concerts typically happened at like the Metro or Talia Hall, places where you don't typically see a 10-year-old headline. But over the course of these weeks, I would watch kids be so brave. You know, I worried and wondered ahead of time, if you put a bunch of girls and a bunch of women in one social space, would they gang up on each other? Would they be catty? Sort of the normal things that we hear about what happens when you put women or girls in a space together. And instead, what I learned is that all of these people together created this incredibly brave and awesome and loud and rambunctious space. Typically, my role was to be a counselor for a band, which means I pretty much chaperoned one band of kids. I was always gravitating to teenagers because they just have, you know, the kind of sarcastic energy that I tend to click well with. You could often have, the skill levels were all over the place. So sometimes You would have a drummer who was just struggling to keep 4/4 time and keep an even, steady beat, working alongside a kid who regularly took jazz guitar lessons on the side. But they never got frustrated with the varying skill level. They were just always totally on board to have fun and support each other. I once worked with a band that instated a rule that anytime someone apologized for screwing up, the whole band had to do 10 push-ups. But things like this were just so inspiring for me to see. And typically these camps took place in schools that had donated their spaces for the week. And so at the end of the day, all of the campers, all of the counselors would file into the space, play Red Rover, do whatever kinds of things kids like to do while we waited for parents to come and pick them up. And so often I stepped back and I looked at this room and I thought how incredible it was. We'd have kids that came from all over the city. Often they didn't know each other. It was pretty uncommon for a camper to know another camper. Same with counselors. Many of us ended up knowing each other little by little as we came back every year. But counselors were often grown-ups who had random free time during the day. For me, I took a week of vacation from my job, but often you'd have college students who had the summer off, graduate students who had the summer off, waitresses, bartenders who had day shifts free, or sometimes parents of campers. We were adults that had funny hair, covered in tattoos, piercings, and variously groomed body hair. The kind of adults the kids don't normally have an opportunity to meet and see. The kind of people that they don't necessarily know that they can grow into if they want to. But putting all these people in the same space, something magical happened. I rarely saw kids fighting. I saw kids working things out for themselves. We had this wall on the board where kids could put positive messages for themselves or for others. And so often you'd see these messages that were like, "Thank you, Susie, for being so brave today and sticking up for yourself," which was like the best thing to see as an adult. So standing in this space, I started wondering what happens in spaces like this. For me as a counselor who, was only there to really work, camp felt like this totally magical space. I would leave camp, this place where I felt like I could sort of be the most true version of myself, and think, boy, I can't wait for 51 more weeks from now when I get to do this all over again. I think the first time after I left camp and was driving back to work on that Monday, I cried the whole car ride because I was like, what am I doing? Why can't I just be a camp year round? And I wondered, if I feel this way, if I feel like camp is this magical place that only exists for 1 week out of the year, what does this mean for campers? Are we actually arming them with an ability to be a little bit braver in their daily lives, to stand up when they see injustices, or do they too leave and think, man, I can't wait to come back to that magical space? This is what led me to an interest in sociology. And I should warn you or let you know that there was never anything academically inclined about me. My high school guidance counselor tracked me as someone who wouldn't be going to college. I think he was actually surprised when I showed up and said, all my friends are meeting with you about college things. I think I should be doing that too, right? When I was in college, I spent a semester on academic probation, despite the fact that I studied for hours every day. I was just not very academically inclined. My mom gently told me many times that I could drop out if this really wasn't a good fit for me. But when I was 26, this space of camp just made me so interested in social spaces and what happens when we put different kinds of people together. And a PhD in sociology felt like the natural way to address this. So in a roundabout way, I met a professor at the University of Chicago who, in her own little ripple, offered to let me audit her class so that she could write me a letter of recommendation. It took me 2 tries to get into a master's program, which helped set me on the right course to the PhD program. But eventually I got in, and it was great. And I studied teenagers and tech use, equity amongst high school students. So what happens whenever we change from notebooks and textbooks to laptops? What does it mean when you are constantly connected with a smartphone and your mom can now text you while you're in algebra class? I sat next to teenagers who told me about sexual harassment experiences with teachers. I helped cover up hickeys after romantic trysts. And I participated in the National Student Walkout after the Parkland shooting. I also daily sat next to a kid who was notorious for pooping in a stairwell and posting it to Snapchat. In my life, teenagers have taught me some of my favorite lessons in humility, weirdness, and the expansive timeline of life. When I graduated from my PhD program, I decided I didn't want to be a professor and instead wanted to put my knowledge into use on the ground. I graduated right into COVID, so I did some project work with Girls Who Code and eventually ended at Get Cities. Get Cities, if you haven't heard of it, is a new initiative funded by Melinda Gates to increase the representation of women, trans, and non-binary folks in tech. Through partnerships, through fellowship programs, and various other programming, we help to increase this representation. We're about a year old, so we also started in the middle of COVID. And if for anyone who's not aware, COVID has increasingly and exponentially impacted women and people of color. So our work was actually set back for us before we even started. Much like me, my team at Get are all people who come from various grassroots sorts of organizations. They are all people who have been chipping away at various corners of the world, heads down, hands dirty kind of work. They are people who don't mind when the work isn't glamorous. They are people who, together, we are, all building this house that we may never actually get to live in ourselves. So this is what Ripple means to me. It means digging into the things you care about minute by minute in 1,000 tiny little ways. It means just having faith that in the end, the ultimate outcome is going to be what you want, even though you may not see it in your lifetime, or you may not see it, in the next week, in the next year, in the next month. It means engaging and learning from others who are different from you, who come in with varying levels of power. So I want to say thanks to everyone for asking me to be here today. I very much appreciate the opportunity to share my story and to share my thoughts, but I also want to acknowledge that it's no coincidence that I was asked to give a talk like this after receiving a PhD and working for someone who has global name recognition. So if I leave you with anything today, it's to think about the people around you who are teachers, who aren't in formal leadership roles, and to think about the people around you who you have the opportunity to influence, who you may also not be in a formal sort of leadership pipeline to. These are often the people that impact us the most and the people that we have an opportunity to impact the most ourselves. Thank you.
Woo-hoo! Yes. Thank you, Sarah.